Welcome to part 2 of my Sega Ages 2500 series coverage for the PlayStation 2. We're going to be looking at 8 more games in this series, so sit back, relax, and let's get started. In February of 2004, Sega Ages 2500 Volume 9, Gain Ground was released. Again, the Sega Ages line would see a very ugly 3D facelift to a beloved franchise. Luckily, the overhead perspective hides the worst of it, allowing you to focus on what made Gain Ground great in the first place, its gameplay. Gain Ground is a game that people have very mixed feelings on, but if you are a fan of the arcade or Genesis release, what's here should be quite appealing. The goal of the game is pretty simple: kill everything on the screen trying to kill you, or get all of your characters to the exit. That's it. You get a motley crew of characters to choose from and rescue, all with various attacks and attributes to help you along the way. And you'll need all the help you can get, because this is one hell of a hard game in the upper levels. Outside of the love it or hate it gameplay, the strongest asset this entry has is the kick-ass synth soundtrack. It remixes the arcade tunes into an anthem worthy of ripping to your MP3 collection. Gain Ground has always been an enigma among Sega's releases. It's hard to explain to someone not familiar with why it's so fun. It's simply one of those games you have to play and see for yourself, whether or not it's for you. March of 2004 would bring the series one of Sega's most recognizable classics, Sega Ages 2500 Volume 10, Afterburner 2. This polygonal remake of the arcade game stands slightly above the previous games in the series graphically, mainly due to the smooth speed of the engine and the fact that most of the game focuses heavily on air battles. While not everything here is perfect visually, it remains faithful enough to the original vision of the game to not take away from the presentation. The soundtrack is undisputably awesome, however, rocking the classic Afterburner soundtrack in all its glory. This adds a ton to the presentation, as this soundtrack has always driven the very best versions of this series to new heights. The gameplay remains true to the arcade as well, and any real fan of the series should appreciate it. While Afterburner has always been sort of a simple game, the frantic action has always held a certain appeal. The game gets really hard really fast, and you'll need some decent reflexes to play it well. Ground-based missions break up the airborne assaults, and later levels have enemies even coming up from behind you. If you've never enjoyed the visceral thrills of Afterburner in the past, this version will do nothing to change your mind. Fans that aren't turned off by the polygon makeover will enjoy this very much, however. Crank up the sound and get ready. Also in March of 2004, Sega Ages 2500 Volume 11, Hokuto no Ken, was released. This complete remake of the Sega Mark III game, which is included in this collection in its entirety, features new polygon characters and backgrounds, new cutscenes and story elements, and new moves to dispatch your foes. Savvy Master System fans will recognize the game, as it was localized in the West as Black Belt. This entry into the series is often destroyed in reviews. Most gamers complain of the repetitive nature of the gameplay and the sloppy one-on-one boss fights. The control is often a target as well, with complaints about its speed and lack of depth coming to bear. I agree with all of it. This game has a ton of issues, and first playing it made me want to return it to the store I bought it from way back in the day. The only thing I appreciated were the graphics. While still definitely in the budget range of remakes, I enjoyed the 2.5D presentation overall. The more I played it though, the more I was drawn to finishing it. I didn't understand the story or cutscenes because of the language barrier, so I can't say that was the hook, but something drove me on. I realized quickly that this had happened before, way back in 1989 with a Genesis game called Last Battle. I was hooked on beating that as well, despite most of my friends branding it a terrible game. Whatever my fascination is with these games, I recognize that they have many issues other people look upon negatively. I kept playing though, and found enough to enjoy that made it worth the $10 I paid for it. In May of 2004, Sega Ages 2500 Volume 12 Poyo Poyo Su Perfect Set would see release. Based upon the arcade version, this is a sort of remix of the game, which includes a new soundtrack, a single-player mode, a versus mode, a super quest mode with cinemas, and a story for each foe, as well as a few other modes where you must complete tasks while clearing away a screen full of blobs. Poyo Poyo has been around for a very long time, and I'm sure many of you have played it in one form or another. It's at its heart a Tetris clone, basically tasking you with removing pieces from a board. The gameplay is mainly centered around versus play here, either against the computer AI or another player. You'll need to remove blocks as quickly as possible, which then appear on your opponent's screen as colorless blobs. These create havoc for trying to clear the screen, and once the blobs fill up the top, it's game over. Unlike most of the other entries in the Ages 2500 line, Poyo Poyo did not receive a major makeover graphically. There has been some filtering added to smooth out the pixels, but outside of that it's very much the same game as the arcade. Fans of this series will find much to enjoy here, and its meager asking price on eBay makes it well worth a look. May of 2004 would see another release in the series, Sega Ages 2500 Volume 13, Outrun. This one has some unappealing visual changes you'll be hit in the face with immediately. The first most obvious change here is the car. It's painfully garish and sticks out like a sore thumb. This is a shame, as the rest of the engine isn't terrible at all. It runs super smooth, and the trackside detail and environments are fairly faithful to the original arcade game. The gameplay has remained surprisingly faithful as well, and mostly feels like Outrun should feel. It includes both Japan and overseas track options, as well as an arrange mode that allows you to race even more tracks, this time with added rivals you must contend with. Outrun's trademark soundtrack returns in full glory as well, with all 3 songs available in their original forms, as well as arranged versions to choose from. Despite some visual nastiness, this Outrun isn't a bad playing experience at all. It sounds the part, it mostly plays the part, and the tracks feel like they should. This release is of course completely overshadowed by Outrun 2 SP and Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast, released on the same console. Those games destroy this, and definitely are what you want if you're in the market for a great Outrun experience. This is on the Sega Classics Collection released in Western markets though, and if you have that compilation, it's definitely worth firing up and rocking out to some Splash Wave. July of 2004 would bring the most surprising release in the series, Sega Ages 2500 Volume 14, Alien Syndrome. This twin-stick shooter shocked the hell out of me in many ways. I am not a fan of the original arcade or its home ports, so I went in expecting very little from this title. To my surprise, what's here feels much more like a Contra game than the classic Alien Syndrome I had known. The graphics retain the budget feel of previous Sega Ages entries, but to much less detriment to the presentation this time. Large enemies fill the screen by the dozens, and power-ups and screen-clearing bombs are everywhere for you to increase your killing power. The game takes major cues from the Aliens franchise, and your main objective is to rescue crew members that have been captured by the alien horde. Story segments piece together each mission explaining what's going on, and each stage is timed with explosives to motivate you to the exit. Each stage ends with a massive boss battle that usually has multiple forms to contend with, and there is a 2-player co-op mode to help you on your mission. The soundtrack drives the gameplay brilliantly, and adds a ton to the atmosphere. So much so I'd say crank it up while you play, because it really is that damn good. This game was included in the North American release of Sega Classics Collection, but omitted from the PAL release due to Sega wanting to avoid the mature rating. European guys got the shaft on that deal, as Alien Syndrome here is a damn fine budget game and definitely worth playing. Dropped in July of 2004 as well, Sega Ages 2500 Volume 15 Decathlete Collection made its debut. I was looking forward to this game as I had enjoyed the Saturn releases very much. It includes elements from Decathlete, Winter Heat, and the Dreamcast release Virtua Athlete 2000. I say elements because the game has a new setup and presentation where it ties all 3 games together. This actually works for Decathlete and Winter Heat, as those games had similar setups and the same characters to begin with, but Virtua Athlete's inclusion feels out of place, especially its changes to the gameplay. The problems only begin there, however, as the game's graphics engine has seen some overhauling from the original Saturn release as well. Models look different, as do the environments, and these changes are not always for the better. The Saturn version also ran in the hardware's high-resolution mode, and the lack of that here is definitely a step back. The graphics here are dull and lack that special shine that the Saturn's high-res mode had. Everything does run at a solid frame rate at least, and Winter Heat sees improvements in areas such as draw-in distance and polygon dropout. The gameplay is pretty much intact in both Decathlete and Winter Heat as well. It's basic track and field style play, so it's easy to come to grips with after a few tries. Virtua Athlete was a shite game on the Dreamcast, and that has been preserved here faithfully. The ludicrous difficulty returns, as does the piss-poor play mechanics. It's an out-of-place edition and has no place in this collection. Overall, the disc has a ton of things I really didn't like, and I wish Sega would have concentrated on representing these games in their original forms. October 2004 would see Sega Ages 2500 Volume 16 Virtua Fighter 2. This port of the Sega Model 2 arcade game has seen many people bash the hell out of it over the years. I am not one of them. This version certainly isn't perfect, but I feel that it has enough going for it to warrant a purchase. The graphics here are much closer to the arcade than the Saturn release, complete with full polygon counts on the characters and fully 3D backgrounds. The backgrounds have some issues with blurry textures, contrasted by some strangely pixelated areas. These eyesores are present in every stage to some degree, and are surprising considering how much more powerful the PlayStation 2 is than the hardware on which this game originally ran. These issues are compounded by a washed out overall image quality that destroys some of the vibrancy that the arcade and Saturn releases are known for. Luckily, these issues do not ruin the presentation, and seeing Shundi's bridge stage in all its 3D glory is still an impressive sight. The awesome Virtua Fighter 2 soundtrack also returns here, and sounds as good as ever. You'll definitely want the speakers cranked up high as you battle Akira. The gameplay is mostly intact as well, and though there is some adjustment to be had in responsiveness, There is nothing here you cannot become acclimated to. The game also has options for the original 57.5 frames per second and the new 60 frames per second modes, as well as options for the original arcade resolution and the PlayStation 2 640 by 480 mode. Game modes are bare bones beyond that, and only feature arcade, versus, and ranking options. This is a disappointment, and the lack of Saturn staples like watch mode, practice mode, and team battle is a big letdown. Virtua Fighter 2 on the PlayStation 2 is far from arcade perfect, but considering its budget price and lack of physical versions for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, this is still a fun package well worth picking up. It's a great complement to the Saturn version, and until we get that perfect version loaded with options, it'll have to do. Now, as the Sega Ages series would go on, Sega would pull back away from trying to redo these games with budget assets, and they would begin to focus very much on trying to preserve the game in their original form, or just simply throw them into compilations. As a matter of fact, as the series would go on, compilations would become very much the order of the day, and a lot of these compilations, they won't have bad. And you'll see that in the next episode. I'm Sega Lord X. I really appreciate you guys watching as always. I'll catch you next time.